Hello there, I'm Leslie.
And I'm Richard.
And we are...
The Unpublishables. You have been listening to The Unpublishables. I'm Richard.
And I was Leslie. Still am Leslie.
Just.
Richard,
Yeah.
what was all that about?
Well, it was about the topic of today's discussion.
Okay, which is?
Writer's block.
So the silence, the beginning and the end with nothing in between, that was symbolic of what goes on in our head when we have writer's block.
Yes, because this time on The Unpublishables, we are tackling the age-old malady that afflicts every writer of all walks, however sort of amateur or professional, and that is the writer's block, because it hits us all at some time or other.
I'm in a period of writer's block at the moment because I'm so busy doing other things, so it's not like I can't write because I'm sitting in front of the computer for 12 hours a day and nothing's coming out. My mind and my house and my desk are just so full of other things that I can't get the time to sit down and write. And when I want to sit down and write, I will sit down and write, and nothing comes because I'm still thinking of all the rubbish that was going on before.
Oh, yes, well, that's...
It's a different type of writer's block.
Oh, yeah, well, that's the muddle syndrome, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is,
Yes, yeah, because you don't have that purifying time where you clear your mind and prepare yourself, because this is an art form, and you do have to do warm-up exercises of a sort, and it doesn't matter if that's like making a cup of tea, listening to a favourite piece of music, or going for a walk, or just sitting there daydreaming about your ambition, or what it is that you want to write, or just having a quick read of something, something that you've previously written, just to refresh you and get you back into it, or reading the writing of someone that you like to kind of enthuse you, or reading the writing of someone you hate, again to enthuse you, either positively or negatively. It's always an encouragement to see what other people have done.
Yeah, and the way you're talking, it sounds as if you've used at least one or two of those techniques.
Oh, I've used them all. I mean, this is the whole point of it. We're not just going to sit here and moan about the trouble of writer's block. We're actually going to try and actually offer some kind of help and solution to people as to when you get writer's block, how do you combat it? And there are three types of writer's block. There's writer's block when you have absolutely no idea whatsoever what to write. You have the writer's muddle, where you just cannot clear your mind and focus on the task in hand. And then also, of course, you've got like the writer's depression, where you've kind of got the idea, you don't have the muddle, but you somehow there's still that mental block that's stopping you from doing it, whether it's a lack of appreciation, whether it's a lack of belief, or some other kind of strange unseen something that is just physically preventing you from doing it.
And we've all had all three, haven't we?
Oh, yes. And then, of course, if you want to, you can add a fourth one, which is the distraction.
Yeah.
Because if you're anything like me, you've got more than one interest, and it's sort of like, I'd love to do some writing, but I also want to do some painting too, and I want to do some reading. And
exactly.
So it's a difficult one, isn't it? But what we're going to try and do is unmuddle it for people.
What I found that to be the most important thing is to get together with other writers, so you don't feel as if you're on your own. And I found writing groups extremely important. And when you go to writing groups, you have to create a piece of work every single week, or you're recommended to, because it means that you can integrate fully into the group. And when you create that piece of work, you read it out, you get feedback, and you go away determined to do better next week, for example. But also the writing group will give you exercises. For example, they might say, write a story on 5 of these 10 words. And it's fake, but it's a really strong and decent discipline to have. I find it that one in particular really worked for me, because they'd perhaps give you a list of 20 words and they'd say a story using 5 of these words, but I would try and use all 20, just for that extra little bit of a challenge. But of course, if you're in a block situation, I don't even know whether you could do that. You could force yourself to even write something that was really mechanical. just to get through the process.
Well, that's why I differentiated types of writer's block, because you've got the writer's block where you just have the ideas but you just don't seem to have the motivation. That's the motivational writer's block, isn't it? And that's probably the one we'll have to talk about last, because I think that is probably the most difficult one. The one I think we could talk about first is just kind of like the stereotypical, what everyone thinks of as writer's block, and that is, I just don't have an idea of what to write. And the ways round that are quite varied depending on who you are, because it's a case of finding the technique that suits you best.
Yeah.
For me, it's daydreaming. I'll go for a walk and start daydreaming, and that will work for me.
And do you record your daydreams on a phone, or do you put it on a notepad when you get back to the car?
No. It stays in the head. It stays in the head, and then it percolates and filters.
Unfortunately, that technique doesn't usually work well with me because my memory is quite poor because I have so much going on. And so I have to write things down. And if I don't write things down, they do get forgotten. And there's so many times I've woken up in the morning after a brilliant dream and 2 minutes later it's completely gone and you're devastated. Yeah, but yeah, that's a good idea. And I used to also, when I was feeling as though I was disorganised, but I had an idea and it would pop into my mind and then almost immediately go, I would record it on my phone as I was walking.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Also, of course, what you've suggested is having a few keywords that you need to use. I mean, what also some people do is they kind of write names, places, situations, and other things on little strips of paper, and they mix them up in a bag, pull them out, and then they have to write something based around those names and places. Another thing to do, if you're stuck, is take a piece of writing that you like by someone else and read it and try and write the same thing but from a different angle.
Yeah.
So you write it from the perspective of a different character, or you write it in the reverse order. And that might be just enough to kind of sort of oil the cogs and get you moving, because sometimes writer's block, all you've really got to do is get a pen in your hands. Oh, how old-fashioned. Sorry, all you've really got to do is open up a Word document and just start your fingers typing, and then the rest will come to you. So, yeah, have a walk and a daydream, write stuff down, pick things out of a hat.
I have another idea.
Yes?
Another idea that I've actually got upstairs. Well, it's actually 3 things together that are all connected. Number 1, magnetic words that you can get to put on fridges to make songs and poems and whatever. I have them all in a kind of a pencil case, and occasionally I'll just take a grab of them and just make them into something. I also have something called story cubes that I bought at Waterstones that have, obviously, the standard cubes, so they have different symbols on each side, and the combinations can make good stories. Other ideas involve getting together with friends and getting them to go around in a group. One person has one sentence, the next person continues, the next person continues. Somebody writes it all down. Then you get to, everybody's contributed, you end up with a paragraph, and then you've got to write continuation of that. I remember writing a particularly good one of my stories about the wheelie bins based on that. And it was amazing, actually, because everyone in the group wrote something completely different, inevitably, even though we all had the same first sentence.
Well, that reminds me of another one, because what you can do if you've got writer's block is take an inanimate object and give it life, and describe the life of that object as though it were alive in some way or other. That's quite a good technique. Worst case scenario, if you are really, really, really stuck with writer's block, then write about the difficulties of overcoming writer's block. And that's a common one, and I see that very often in the writing competitions and magazines that I look at, where they say, we don't want any stories about the difficulty of being a writer. Don't write a story about the writer thinking about writing a story who's thinking about writing a story. Give us a proper story. And so I kind of took that away, because I had a period of writer's block and I wanted to write about the difficulty of writing with writer's block. But I kind of thought about what they'd said and embellished it to the point that I wasn't talking about just writer's block, but there was also another story going on behind it, and that was the quest for publication and the quest for fame and acknowledgement. And so I ended up coming up with a story known as The Writer's Tale, and I do believe you want to play a bit of it now, don't you?
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Time for the Unpublishables to do a bit of reading. So here's Richard with part 1 of The Writer's Tale.
A horror writer must constantly reach into the darkness and touch the unknown, moulding whatever they have found into words, hoping, ever cautiously, to contain it upon the page. Sometimes, though, when courting the trails of chaos, the spirit of evil does not respect the limits placed upon it. Sadly for the writer, when this act of rebellion occurs, its power is all-consuming, and it inevitably ends in death or madness. The demands for inspiration and new discovery, however, often prompt a man to follow the darkest path, and many fall foul with little knowledge of what they are doing. Such is the way of evil. It can seduce and corrupt the individual, making them believe the darkest, most foul trickery is the purest, most beautiful light of day. In just such a setting, I found my own doom, and it was there, at a place called Lilac Lodge, that my story begins. I was suffering from a spell of writer's block. The well of inspiration had run dry, and, in my quest to regain all that I had lost, I had come to be at the small country cottage. It sat a short distance off the North Coast Road, along an old dirt track, bordered by 2 cornfields and surrounded by the light fragrance of summer flowers. The setting was not exactly heavy with the atmosphere of ghostly happenings, but, in spite of the picturesque thatched roof and leaded windows, I had hoped that it would be from there that my latent creativity would flow. The reason was quite simple. Pretty as it was, Lilac Lodge had had an unhappy history. Its beauty was tainted by a story of witchcraft and murder, and I sought it as my refuge in the hope that I might gain some experience from the legend stained upon its walls. The help that I had required was from an old witch called Anne Salis, who, in spite of her execution in 1646, was still said to perform her evil. Fairy tale stuff, true, but the local population had been convinced enough for most of them to have evaded my inquiries. Even the estate agent, a rational man of business who had not wished to talk of ghosts, conceded a similar story. He had pointed to a blackened stump in the garden where she had finally been hanged and burnt some 200 years after her death. Whether it had been true or not had had little consequence in my mind. All I had been interested in was the story and what it may have offered me. Even so, when the estate agent had left and a cool breeze touched my arm, I still felt the first creep of fear enter my soul. Perhaps I was being unwise. I was no longer so sure of myself and did not know. However, my story needed to be written, and I stubbornly refused to be scared by a silly ghost story. Walking towards the front door with a determined step, I entered the cottage. Inside, my senses were assaulted by the overpowering tang of old timbers and the smell of damp walls. Without doubt, and I was by no means a spiritual person at all, I could feel the corrupted soul of Anne Salis reaching out to me from every corner. Her presence was strong, and I was determined to make contact that very evening. Before then, I sat down with my research notes and revised the story of her existence and how best to converse with the witch. The story I read was one of an elderly woman who had been accused of consorting with the devil. At the time of her life, the 17th century, such a claim was not uncommon, and the charges levelled against her were swiftly executed, as was she, along with many others. What distinguished the case against Anne Salis was its supposed authenticity. Unlike the other victims of the great witch purges, Anne's trial followed a catalogue of misfortunes that had struck the inhabitants of the surrounding parishes. Most interesting of all, though, was the list of deeds said to have continued after her execution. The customary drowning and burial in an unmarked grave had proven ineffective. It was not until her body was exhumed and burnt upon the tree outside her home, sometime in the mid-19th century, that the mar of the witch was finally gone. For me, though, the evidence was far less convincing, appearing at best to be merely circumstantial, consisting of just 2 suicides and 1 case of madness in 300 years. Although, in a small community, it had been enough to keep the voice of speculation alive. As a consequence, the property had remained largely empty even after her supposed exorcism in the 1860s. As the daylight slowly disappeared and the cottage became covered in darkness, I sat alone upon the bedroom floor and began to clear my mind. With the techniques of subtle meditation that I had acquired from my studies of the occult, I attempted to contact the long-dead spirit of Anne Salis. Silently I concentrated my thoughts, closing my eyes and opening my senses to any hint of a supernatural presence. Gently I tried to reach to the far beyond, the plane of the dead, where the knowledge of all things lay. At that moment, the air within the room altered. Still and breathless, an alien presence crept across the floor. It started in a far corner and spread around the room until it encircled me in its hold. I sensed that it was an aura that appeared to precede an earthly body. Anne, I thought to myself with an excited shudder that promptly froze. Of a sudden, my heart rang cold. The moment I had sought had arrived, and I was scared. I looked towards the door and imagined I had heard some movement from behind it. I'd wanted it to go away, but it was too late. The witch was there. A knock sounded at the door. I looked away and tried to pretend that it had not happened. Again, there was a second knock. I ignored that also. There was a long pause, during which time I believed that the spectre had gone, but it had not. Violently the door shook, banging and hammering as though it was about to be thrown from its hinges. Terrorized, I released a gasp of fright that caused the door to stop shaking. I breathed a moment, feeling the air leaving my lungs as a heavy weight may have done, and listened intently for any further noise. In a curious sense, I felt somehow lighter, as though a part of me was lost, more fragile than weak. I attributed my hollow feeling to fear, suspecting it to be only a temporary thing that would pass with time. Eventually, I stood up and headed towards the light switch. With light in the room, I recovered myself and opened the door. "Leave well alone," hissed the ghostly apparition of Anne Salis as it pointed an accusing finger towards me. Its face gnarled and blackened with decay. With unblinking pits for eyes, it moved closer, its flaking lips snarling in a tight grimace as its diseased breath repeated the timely warning, "Leave well alone, or you'll rot in hell." Slamming the door shut, I leant with my back against its frame and gave an icy shudder. With my heart pounding, I swallowed hard and sank to the floor on trembling legs. As I did so, I became aware of a cold atmosphere that had entered the room. It circled around the corners of the walls and moved steadily inwards, surrounding me with its cool and unnatural touch. I feared Anne's return, but I found that I could not move, being forced to endure the ugly sensation as it weaved its way around and even through me, touching my heart and making me gasp with laboured breaths that squeezed ever tighter at my chest. I felt the hand of death. In a mad panic, I thrashed and writhed as I attempted to free myself, but its grip held me too. Suddenly, I could take no more, and the burning sensation within my lungs spilled out into an almighty yell. I awoke to find myself at home, in my own bed, and immediately began to wonder what it was that I had experienced. Dream? Madness? Or mere delusion? Confused, I consulted my watch and saw that it was Thursday, the 12th. So it had been a dream, I thought, with a sigh. I was not due to arrive at the cottage until the following day. Shaking my head with a nervous laugh, I was both embarrassed and ashamed to admit that I had been the victim of a bad dream. Anne Salis, indeed. How was a witch of 400 years dead meant to be stood at my door? The notion was utterly impossible. The most I would see there, if I was lucky, was a mouse. Wearily, I stumbled from my bed towards the bathroom and took a long drink from the tap. Looking up at the mirror, I was forced to stagger back with a gasp of fright. Reflected upon its surface were the words, "Leave be." Sharply, I span around to see the door slammed shut, just as the atmosphere in the room began to alter. Unable to breathe, I clutched at my chest. For the second time, I felt the slow pressure of death coil itself around me. Strewn with panic, I clambered wildly in a mad bid for escape. Like a fire-trapped animal, I carelessly struck out at the first chance of freedom and spilled headlong through the 5th-floor window of my flat. Screaming as I fell, the rush of air soon stole my voice, and I was forced to end my flight in a gape of horrified silence. At one instant, my downward plunge appeared to be unnaturally slow. Then, at another, mercilessly swift. Whatever the scene, I did not remember the point at which I hit the ground. Instead of a sudden blow, I was submerged into darkness, and for a long time I could see nothing. Then, after what appeared in my mind to be an age, I began slowly to discern a distant shape. Bright and blue, it glowed like a star, becoming ever clearer and ever closer. As time passed, I came to realize that it was not becoming brighter, but I was steadily drifting towards it, until, at long last, it occupied the whole of my vision, and I found myself within an endless expanse. As I floated in space, I looked around the cool, blue void. I watched it with interest, the delicate shadows of shimmering light as they fell through the void in veil-like strips. It was then that I realized that this distant plain was in fact an ocean. A sense of isolation overtook me, and I shuddered in my frail shell as I began to conceive just how alone and vulnerable I was. At that moment, I discovered that my fears were not unfounded, as, in the darkness, I could faintly detect the approach of a deadly form. At first only a dim speck, it swiftly glided through the waters and allowed me to witness its full outline. With a chill gasp, I cried out in fright as I recognized the body of a great white shark. The creature's eyes were a cold but glossy-coloured black that sparkled with a hungry look upon seeing me. With a sharp motion of its tail, it glided through the veils of sunlight that created a marbled pattern upon its back, and, as it approached, I could almost imagine a cruel smile appear upon its lips. The sight of its triangular teeth struck terror into my heart, but not as I had expected it to. Curiously, it was not the raw power of its mouth that had scared me, but the almost human expression upon its grin. It seemed to have an air of knowing that was reflected in its eye, causing it to display a quality more intense than the indifferent stare of a natural predator. I understood then that the shark was something more than a normal creature, a divine being. As its enormous body encircled me, I was forced to expel an involuntary shudder, and I thought I heard the shark laugh. "No need to shiver, my creation," it said. "I have no mind to consume you yet." "Creation?" I objected. "You speak as though you own me," not thinking to actually question the fact that it spoke at all. The shark laughed, its jet black eye staring straight into mine. "And so I do, my pet. I hold the power to destroy you within my means, do I not? So, I think, I can make a claim of ownership, my creation." As I stared back at the mighty creature, its sharp white teeth just inches from my face, I could hardly argue. But, with the courage that befits a fool, I did. "So you hold some power over me," I conceded. "But why call me your creation?" "Because I am the creator of all things, even the body of this shark within which you see me." "Then if not a shark, who are you?" I asked. "I have no true shape. I am infinity, the essence and spirit of creation, the force of life and death, which I have no true shape. I am infinity, the essence and spirit of creation, the force of life and death, which exists within all things. I am the universe, the shark replied. God, I exclaimed. The shark gave a satisfied nod. Good. Now you will lend me the fear that is owed me and listen to me, as you should do, for I have summoned you here, so that I may save you. Why fear you? I asked, having failed to listen to the remainder of his sentence. He struck me with an angry glance and said, because fear is the only emotion you damned humans respect. Fear is the only thing that can save your soul. One day you may understand that, but then it will be too late. That is why I am speaking to you now, so that you might stand a chance against it when you are faced with evil. He hissed in a rush of fury as he charged open-mouthed towards me. I then gained a fearful respect for my creator and placed my arms over my face for protection. I closed my eyes and screamed. Shuddering, I felt the last cold wave of the mystic ocean flow over me as I once more lay within a state of darkness.
That was part 1. Back to the chatter, just for now. Thank you, Richard. We'll have a chat about that in a minute. I'm going to read my very typical writer writing about not being able to write piece. So here's my poem of sorts called The Day I Couldn't Write. The day I couldn't write. My daughter's stolen my laptop, my dog's asleep on my pad. I'm pacing around and up and down and driving my family mad. Unthinking, unknowing, confused and tense, my shoulders are rounded with fear. I look at the sky, think sunset and fly, then go to the fridge for a beer. I have to break free from this self-imposed tyranny, have to break free for a while. Simply have to scour Amazon, have to scan Instagram, searching for syntax and style. No, I'm not evading or scared of the writing or wading through news with no cause. I'm looking for data, for research, you hater. I'm just off to the fridge in this pause. Pause. I can't think, I can't blink, I could only just drink, but the beer's now going down too well. Oh, that's better. Throat's wetter. I'm going to get a packet of Pringles, don't tell. Wow, these crisps are salty and crunchy and naughty and almost inspire a scribble. Where's the pad? There it is. Oh, but now it's all ripped and it's covered with dog hair and dribble. Yuck. Quick to the laptop. Oh no, I now have not a laptop for typing, to write my great English novel. It's set in a hovel and details a poor peasant's plight. Got it all in my head, every detail and death, but the stupid phone rings and it's gone. So I pick up a beer and sniff back a tear. Oh, sod it, I'll write a blues song. I look for the laptop, it's packed in a boot box. Don't ask me, I'm just glad to find it. But I stare at its screen, it's malicious, it's mean, and it's so slow I feel I should wind it. I type in a word but the laptop's not heard, it just freezes and gives me a blank look. I forget what I'm typing, the drivel I'm writing. Oh good, now the space bar is stuck. Stuck! I'm procrastinating, I'm tired, I'm aching, I'm staring and staring at white, till one idea comes, then another just runs, and another, all night. The typing then stops as my old body flops, and I sleep with my head on the keys. I awake in the morning with coughing and yawning, and look at a whole page of bees. After pressing the undo for ages and ages, I finally delete all that's wrong, and I'm left with 10 pages of cliff tops and rages and bodices heaving in song. I don't recognise it, but like it, it's quite wise. Oh, and that bit's quite racy as well. Feel great satisfaction. I've written this action. And blimey, it might even sell. That was Leslie Atherton's The Day I Couldn't Write. Back to the chat. Okay, there you go. 2 pieces by writers about writing, completely different. Did you find yours therapeutic or useful in terms of skills?
Yes, I did, because it gave me something to write about. And while I was writing, more ideas came to me.
Yeah.
Till by the time I'd finished it, I'd actually smashed the block.
Yeah.
And it was completely gone then. And I was able to go on and write other stuff.
Yeah.
When I first started it, I wasn't happy with it at all, because I was thinking, oh, this is just excruciating, this is just rubbish. It probably still is. So there's probably a lot of people who skipped through it after a few sentences, think, oh, this is rubbish. But I didn't feel like that towards the end, because I'd managed to invest in it so much imagery and imagination that it was like, no, I don't have writer's block. I just didn't know how to get started. So yes, it was very useful to me. I've had writer's block since then, but more often it's been the writer's block of fatigue, where I just haven't had the time to clear my mind, because by the time I've got round to writing after doing the daily chores, it's time to go to bed.
Yeah.
The other writer's block I've had has been the distraction writer's block, where the urge to do other creative things, or maybe even just go out on my bike and enjoy the sunshine, has been much greater than my desire to write.
Well, my poem, Day I Couldn't Write, that is all about the distraction factor. It's not about me being distracted by the joy of other things that I want to do. It's actually about me being distracted by the fact that every time I try to do something, it's thwarted. And that's definitely another element of it, isn't it?
Oh, yes, certainly. And
especially when you have kids and a house to run and all the rest of it.
And I was going to mention it last. How do you get around the fact that there are not enough hours in the day? And it's the way I did it, is the fact that you just do a little deal with yourself. Because what I used to do often is I'd waste a whole day agonising over which of the two things I wanted to do. Because there was the thing I wanted to do, and then there was the thing I felt that I should be doing. And before I knew it, the whole day was gone, because I'd spent the whole day umming and ahhing. So what you do is the judgment of Solomon. It's like the two women arguing over the ownership of the baby. So, all right, I'll cut it in half. You have one half, you have the other half. And that's what you do. If there's something that you want to do, and there's something else that you feel that you need to do or want to do, cut the day in half and say, right, okay, the sun is shining, there's daylight, I'll use that time to go out on my bike. Then when I've come back, I'll do a bit of writing. And if there's still daylight and I still want to ride my bike, I'll go back out on my bike and do it that way. So you just break it up into little lumps and come to a compromise with yourself.
There's another way of doing that as well. It's taking the same procedure, but from a different angle. Basically, you say to yourself, I can't write, or I haven't got time to write, or there are too many distractions or commitments. You say, I'm going to write for 10 minutes, that's all. I cannot write for more than 10 minutes.
Glad you said that, because what delays a lot of people is the idea that they've got to sit down and finish the task all in one go. And it is okay to do it in a piecemeal fashion. Because a friend of mine is writing a book at the moment. She gets most frustrated with herself because she writes it and it's not perfect or it's not finished, because she keeps needing to go back to bits because she can't write it the way she wants to first time. And I said, that's what the editing process is for.
Yeah, most of us actually write an excessively rough version.
But
you actually go with the stream of consciousness. You keep writing, keep writing, and then you get to a point, perhaps at the end of a chapter, but usually at the end of the actual book, you have maybe 40 really, really rough pieces of work that all connect together, but actually are appalling. Then the real work begins. But at least you've got your inspiration. You have to do, I don't know what you call it, the noddy work or something. You have to do the hard work.
Well, the real work.
The real work,
I mean, the writing's the fun bit. The editing is where the real work comes.
I don't even go back
where all the commas go.
Exactly. I don't even go back and correct my spelling mistakes or anything like that. As long as I can tell from what I've written what I meant to write. So, I always write because as Becca shoe, just because your fingers get mixed up, don't they? So I never go back and correct anything like that. But there are people, I think my son's one of these, where you have to get each paragraph working correctly or each sentence working correctly. You can't move on unless you have everything right. And I would say to him, for example, because I remember him failing a test at school because he couldn't work out the name to give his character. And so the whole of the thing fell apart because he spent the entire time trying to find a name to call his character. And I just said, just put question mark in pencil, leave a gap, and carry on.
That's what I always
and it
do.
will come to you.
I always do a dash. I very often actually name the character last.
Right.
And I just do a dash, or I do a number if there's a couple of characters whose names I can't think of. And that's writer's block of a different kind. I mean, we'll talk about choosing the right name in another episode, because that's one that interests me, because Ian Fleming taught me a lot about that. But yeah, certainly don't feel that you've got to complete it all in one go, because that's another thing that makes people have the writer's block, is the belief that it has to be perfect the first time and you have to finish it all in one go. No, sometimes it does it good to let it mature and sit on the shelf.
I've got a full novel at the moment that's been waiting on the shelf for over a year because I'm not quite ready to go back to it. I've had beta readers looking at it, or ARC readers, and I've had people looking at it and giving me quite a lot of feedback. And what have I done with it? Very, very little. I've put it to one side. I've read the feedback and I've thought, initially mostly I thought, that's not fair. And then secondly, after an hour or so, I thought, oh gosh, yeah, I wish that wasn't true, but it really is true. But I'm not quite ready to do it yet. So, yeah, over a year, there's no reason why you can't leave something, as long as you get round to it eventually.
Yes.
You know, you don't leave too many unfinished works on your deathbed. It's better to get them out there than not have them out there.
That's probably me. It's about 3 or 4 different books flashed before my mind then.
Oh dear.
Thinking of finishing things off.
Trigger you?
Yes, you did. Thinking of finishing things off, we can go to the second half of The Writer's Tale. Just to remind those of you who listened to that first half, the writer has just finished having a conversation with God and has just come to on the front lawn outside of the Lilac Lodge.
Here's part 2 of Richard Hollingdale's The Writer's Tale.
Slowly, my body came to life as I clawed at the long blades of wet grass that grew between my fingers. I opened my eyes to see the outside of Lilac Lodge. Huh? What madness is this? I said with a start, observing the moonlit scene with disbelief. How did I get here? Then I quietly laughed. I looked at the moist blades of grass, studying the minute droplets of water that hung in the air. And it was then that I realized the price of my vanity. The inspiration I had sought was indeed madness. No sane God could have created an entire universe of such immeasurable detail. Only an obsessive lunatic could have imagined the world as it was, and any mortal who wished to imitate the process in fiction was doomed to the same fate. At that point my laughter stopped, and I began to weep with despair. I could see no fairness in life any more. All I had wanted to do was to write a story people would love and remember. But that was where I had been wrong. What I'd wanted to do was write a story that would encourage people to love and remember me, and that was why I had failed. But I was yet to realise that. All I knew at that time was that so many before me had appeared to have achieved their goal without the loss of their sanity. So why did I have to go mad? What had been their secret? What did they have to do? What was it that I had to do? As I pondered those thoughts, I heard the approach of another's footsteps, and, wiping my eyes, I looked up to see the face of an attractive woman. "Hello," the girl greeted me, with an understanding smile. "I've been waiting for you for some time, and I know your dilemma. I have helped many others in your position before now, and think that I can help you." She smiled again. "So you need not weep those tears," and, with a gentle hand, she dabbed my cheeks dry. "Thank you," I said, after a long pause. Feeling, in spite of her outward kindness, I had a reason to fear her. The girl appeared to acknowledge my doubt, witnessed it in the knowing glimmer that was contained within her eyes. With blood-red hair and light emerald green eyes, she was very striking to look at, I could not deny, but somehow her furtive glances caused me to sense an air of unease within her motive. "Why do you want to help me?" I asked, challenging the underlying evil in her stare. "Simple," she smiled, "to save your sanity and give you the story that you desire." "How do you know about that?" I exclaimed. "My servant, the witch, told me. She said that you needed a story. I have one, if you're willing to pay the price." What price is that? I asked. Why, your eternal soul. That is the price I ask. Eternal soul? I exclaimed. But who are you? The girl looked at me and smiled. It had been a question that had required no answer. Oh, God, I muttered. She twitched an eyebrow, vaguely amused by my misrecognition, and said, Close. I remained silent. She continued. I guess you want to know why I'm not a man. It is quite logical, really. I am God's opposite number, and he is a man. Then it stands to reason that I should be a woman. But you don't see it that way, do you? Well, just like God, I'm not all that's expected of me, so you'll just have to cope with the disappointment. There she paused to breathe a genuine sigh of regret. As she did so, she produced a cigarette from a small shoulder bag. There she paused to breathe a genuine sigh of regret. As she did so, she produced a cigarette from a small shoulder bag and lit it. Yes, it is sad to say, she continued, watching the spirals of smoke slowly drifting into the air. My image in the popular imagination is far more powerful than I could ever hope to be. Still, there is one thing, she noted with a positive glint in her eyes. I think that it annoys God to think more people are scared of me than him. Do I scare you? No, came my honest reply. But if I was told that I'd be meeting you, I think that I would have been. See, she grinned, you've proved my point exactly. Still, I need not feel hard done by. I am a business person. I wish to strike a bargain with you, and I do not think it would help anyone to show my teeth. Now, you're sold for a story. Do we have a deal? I, don't know. I hesitated. Well, I haven't all day, she responded in a distracted tone, fishing in her bag for a set of car keys. Ah, there they are. You drive? I questioned with surprise. Of course, she replied. How else do I travel anywhere? Well, I don't know, but you're... The devil, she interrupted, a distinct note of irritation in her voice. Yes, I know that, but, be it as it may, unlike God, I am doomed to walk whereas he can fly. Or swim, I said. Yes, or swim, she smiled. Does he still do that Jaws routine, then? I thought that you humans were too well educated in the natural habit of sharks to fall for that show of teeth and fins. Any more? Don't you agree? Yes, I do, until you're actually faced with the threat of death, that is. No amount of knowledge, then, can conquer the fear of being attacked and eaten alive by another creature. That's what God preys upon, the emotion of fear, and not the act. The shark is just a vehicle for a much greater force. For a time the devil said nothing. Her face was turned away from mine. She focused her attention on the dew-covered lawn, gently clawing patterns in it with the heel of her shoe. I've been so stupid, so utterly stupid for all these millennia, she said. I've mocked God's theatrics as I saw them, when, in reality, the great white was the only living thing worthy of him, the only creature that could reflect his true majesty and prove itself divine. Only the untamable maintains its power to fascinate, captivate, and terrorize all at once. To be in possession of such a tremendous aura is to rest upon a throne of supernatural proportions. It is truly God's equal on earth. The mouth of the beast is symbolic, not of death, but of the gateway to the universe. The devil then turned towards me and smiled. And you turned it down. To be embraced by God is to be blessed by creation itself. He offered you the whole universe, and you refused it. Ha! So now, my weak one, seeing as you have rejected God's offer and have lost your chance of immortality, your only chance to be remembered lies here with me on earth. What do you decide, total oblivion, or your soul for a story? Answer me now, yes or no? I don't know, I said, with great indecision. I'd always hoped to be inspired in some other way than this. Sensing my doubt, the devil knelt down beside me and produced the manuscript that I had so long searched for. It's yours, she said in a hushed whisper, lightly fingering its pages with her hand. All you need do is exchange it for your soul. I looked down at the manuscript and noticed the strange growth protruding from her little finger. Her gaze followed mine and she laughed. Oh, you've noticed my sixth finger. That's the sign, in case you needed any. that I am who I say I am? God gave it to me as a symbol of my ambition, my desire to overtake the heavens and rule as he does. It allows people a chance to recognise me when we meet, if they so want to. You see, like God, I can alter my form, but one thing that remains always the same is my 6th digit. I think he intended it as an impediment, but it's hardly worked that way. Most of those whom I've met were already so corrupted they could scarcely see themselves for who they were, let alone me. But why tell me then? I asked. Because I like you, and feel that it would be unfair to do it any other way. The great and the powerful are always corrupted with their own self-adoration and lust for immortality long before I meet them, and they deserve no explanation. I'm sure I have no pity for them. But you are a little different. You have been brought to me by desperation, and I sympathise with that, and I want to help you. Unlike God, I do not demand obedience. I have no slaves in my service, only servants, those who serve willingly by virtue of their free will, and not through fear. As I said, I am a business person. God talks of the ethereal, promises all, but delivers nothing, expecting faith to appear without offering any physical evidence. That's not what I call reasonable, not at all fair, not at all businesslike. She paused to stroke the manuscript with her hand, but I, on the other hand, make no such demands or promises. I deliver. Here is your manuscript, the story you have searched for, and, if I may say so, the one you have already worked so hard for. This is yours. You have earned it. It's only right that you should take it. Is it a deal? Do you accept? She took my hand and placed it upon the manuscript. Feel, she rasped in a low voice, the manuscript that you've so long desired. Here, real. It's yours to touch. Now take it. Slowly her hand left mine. I could feel the pages beneath my palm. True to her word, the manuscript was indeed real. I considered her words and realised that she was right. I had earned it. No one had searched as hard as I had, gone through the labours that I had in order to discover my story. How many other writers had left their desks and sought inspiration in a haunted house? There were none that I could think of. Yes, yes, I whispered in a feverish breath. I'll take it. Eagerly, I grabbed the manuscript and read through its pages. To my disdain, however, there was not a single line within it that did not already appear familiar to me. Every detail of the past 2 nights were there. My arrival at the cottage, the fall from the window, the conversation with God, my bargain with the devil. You've cheated me, I exclaimed. I could have written this on my own. Yes, I know, the devil laughed in a mocking tone. Still, it does at least prove the old maxim, truth is stranger than fiction. Besides, I resent your accusation. I have cheated no one. You still have a story, and it will inevitably make you famous when it's found upon your body. My body? I cried. Yes, your body, she repeated. Her talon-like hand reached towards my shoulder, and she pushed me back with an angry scream. Now, curse you to hell! I did not land upon the lawn outside of Lilac Lodge, as I had expected to, but was again rushing through the cold night air as I tumbled downwards from my bathroom window. No, no, God, no, I screamed. But God did not hear me. I continued to fall, and, upon that occasion, I hit the concrete pavement. Slowly bleeding to death, I lay in a warm pool of blood, the promised manuscript clutched in my dying hand. Indeed, I would be famous, just as soon as I died.
Thanks, Richard, for part 2 of The Writer's Tale. Now back to the chat. Hi, this is Leslie Atherton and Richard Hollingdale on the Unpublishables podcast. I'm now going to play a very quick poem of mine called The Voice. This is one of the main reasons why I struggle to write. It's the lack of self-belief. It does emerge very, very regularly. Anyway, I'm not normally a poet. I'm not a good poet, but I do write poetry. And so you're going to be subjected to 2 pieces of poetry of mine this episode. So here you go. It's The Voice. What do you get when a non-poet writes poetry? You get the sentiments in the voice. There's no way you can sing and dance, said voice with sneering, snarling stance. Your playing's crap, your singing's worse, makes fingers twitch, makes eardrums burst. Creative stuff's just not your thing, the voice said. Girl, just pack it in. Your needles break, your knitting sags, failed projects lounge in patchwork bags. Your hemming rips, your beading flops, applique flakes and stitches drop. Creative stuff's just not your thing, the voice said. Girl, just pack it in. I'm writing. Girl, for goodness sake, you're barely literate. You're fake. You self-indulge. You scroll your name with fallow dreams of shallow fame. Creative stuff's just not your thing. The voice said, girl, just pack it in. I've read your awful stuff, voice said. You're destined never to be read. Remove the stories from your head. The only decent scribes are dead. Creative stuff's just not your thing, the voice said. Girl, just pack it in. What makes you think you'll ever scroll? A story strong, a tale not tall, and why would any person buy your camping tales or babies cry? Creative stuff's just not your thing, the voice said. Girl, just pack it in. So when I'm low, the voice is loud, and when I'm strong, the voice is cowed. I'll do it even if it's bad, 'cause if I don't, I'll just go mad. Yes, when I'm low, the voice is loud, but when I'm strong, the voice is cowed. Creative stuff's just not your thing, the voice said. Girl, just pack it in. That was my so-called poem, The Voice. More chat now. Well, that was us.
Yes, so that was properly us this time, and we hopefully have provided you with some inspiration and helped you if you are struggling with your writer's block. Just to recap, what we've got here, got basically, three types of writer's block. There's the writer's block where you just have no ideas whatsoever. There's the writer's block where you're just too busy to focus, and then there's writer's block where you are distracted by other things. The writer's block, where you are just completely blank, go for a walk, get out the story dice, get some random strips of paper, create stories with your magnetic letters and words.
Go to a garden centre.
Yes.
Anything out of your rhythm.
Write the life of an inanimate object as though it were alive. Or take a story that already exists and just write it from a different angle. And I'm sure there's very many published authors that have done that. And I can think of a few, but I'm not going to name them because I don't want to be sued. Also, if you are distracted and you can't switch off from other things, give yourself a little routine so that you can meditate and get yourself into the right frame of mind before you start writing. And if you've got your distractions, the ones that are constantly pulling you away from your writing, have a negotiation with yourself and come to an agreement. Split the day into half, split the day into quarters, and give over a half or a quarter to the other things that you want to do, and then do the writing. Or do the writing first and give over your time to the other things that you want to do. Because then you'll get stuff done and it'll be guilt-free. And remember, you don't have to finish it all in a day, and it doesn't have to be perfect the first time.
And sometimes it's okay to just do 10 minutes.
Yes, indeed.
Sometimes it really is the only way that you can do it, just to put 10 minutes in, on the bus, on the train, in your car while you're waiting for the children to come back from school, whatever. 10 minutes is fine. It's better than nothing, and that's a lesson that I need to constantly remind myself when I feel like I have to fill up every single hour of the day with other things in order to get time so that I can spend half a day writing. No, I'm never going to do that. I'm a parent of 2 children. I'm never going to get an entire day. What I will get is half an hour or 10 minutes or maybe an hour if I'm lucky. I'll use it.
Also, it's not a mechanical process. You know, this isn't a factory. You don't clock in and 8 hours later you clock off. This is a creative thing, and you can only do it sometimes when it allows you to. Yes, you do need to plan. You do need to be structured, because if you just whimsically think, oh, I'm going to do it one day, it will never happen. So yes, you do have to plan a little bit, but it has to be quite a flexible plan, because some days you might sit down to do it and the muse just does not allow you to.
Yeah.
Thinking of allowing people to do things, we better allow them to go. So I will say I've been Richard.
And I'm Leslie.
And we are the Unpublishables.
Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye.